Greetings and salutations, young true believers. Welcome to Critical Thinking. So, this course is, I would argue, the most important course that you will ever take in your college career. Why is that? Because, unlike a lot of other courses where the material is only relevant to, say, that discipline or that particular profession, right? What you're going to learn in critical thinking will be applicable to every other class that you ever take, and moreover, it's going to be applicable to your everyday life. So, this is an extremely important course. We're going to start off with the nuts and bolts. What's an argument? Well, as philosophers use the word argument, uh, they do not mean what we typically think of when you hear the word argument, as in a heated exchange between two disagreeing parties, right? When philosophers use the word argument, what they mean is an attempt to persuade someone via the use of rational considerations, right? Uh, it's an attempt to demonstrate a claim. What's a claim? A claim is a statement about a state of affairs in the world, right? Another term you might hear is issue, and an issue, the word issue refers to any subject that can be rationally debated. So when philosophers talk of arguments, they're talking about an attempt to establish a position via logical considerations. Arguments consist of two parts. The first part is the premise, and the premise is that part of an argument that contains the logical or evidentiary considerations that support the second part of the argument. The second part of the argument is called a conclusion. And conclusion is that part of an argument that contains our stance or perspective on an issue. Now, it should be noted that an argument, any given argument, can have one premise, only one premise. It could have multiple premises. The conclusion of one argument can be used as a premise in a second argument, but the conclusion of one argument cannot be used as a premise in that same argument. So let me give you an example. All people are mortal. Socrates is a person, therefore Socrates is mortal. I can't use that conclusion, Socrates is mortal, as a premise in that same argument, the one that I just made. I can use it, however, as a premise in a second argument. And there are complex reasons for that. We'll talk about that in the weeks to come. If you're reading through chapter 1 in the Moore and Parker text, you might see terms such as belief, uh, proposition, claim. All right, so belief refers to a a mental state that someone has with respect to a state of affairs in the world. I believe that there's a mountain in Washington State called Mount Rainier, not far from Seattle, right? Now, a proposition, however, is a claim about a state of affairs in the world, right? It's a sentence that has a truth value, right? So a lot of things that we say in any given language don't have a truth value, like "hey" or "stop" or "go," right? They don't have truth values. Those are exclamations, right? Questions don't have truth values. Propositions do, right? So if I say Mount Rainier is a 20,000 plus foot mountain in Washington State, not far from Seattle, then I have made a statement. I made a proposition about a state of affairs in the world, right? That leads us to claims, right? So if a proposition has a truth value, and this should be noted, there are only two truth values that we recognize in Western logic: true and false, truth and falsity. That's it. You might be wondering, okay, are there other logics? Yes, for example, in classical Indian logic, there are four truth values that are recognized. There's true, false, mostly true, mostly false. We don't typically recognize, or we don't recognize mostly true, mostly false in Western logic. We can argue about whether we should or not. Um, so, claims, right? My claim about Mount Rainier being in Washington State and being not far from Seattle is an objective claim, meaning it's true or it could be false, regardless of whether or not of what anyone thinks about it, right? So, um, to give you a classic example of this, God either exists or God does not exist. It does not matter what any human being thinks about that issue. There's a truth of the matter. It's also true that there is life in the Andromeda Galaxy or there isn't life in the Andromeda Galaxy, and that's also irrespective of what any human being, any particular human being thinks about it, right? There is a truth of the matter. That's what makes it objective, right? So an objective claim is true or false regardless of what any human being thinks about it, and it's also true or false regardless of whether or not we will ever be able to settle the issue, right? So the Andromeda Galaxy is the galaxy that is closest to the Milky Way, right? It's still hundreds of lifetimes away from our galaxy and our planet. Maybe one day a future generation of humans will know whether or not there's life in the Andromeda Galaxy. Right now, we have no way of knowing, right? I don't think anyone will ever be able to settle the issue of whether or not God exists. Okay, so those are objective claims, claims about states of affairs in the world expressed in terms of declarative statements or propositions, that is to say, statements with a truth value. Well, what else are there? There are subjective claims. So if you state, I prefer cherry pie to apple pie, that's a subjective claim. Subjective claims refer or they make reference to matters of taste, right? If your favorite genre of music is reggae and your friend's is country, no one's right, no one's wrong. There is no fact of the matter about it. It's just a claim about your psychological state. I like this, I prefer this, I don't like this, I don't prefer that, right? So that having been said, we are going to be concerned by and large in this class, right? There's one chapter, the chapter 12, that we'll talk about some aesthetic considerations. You should know aesthetics being referring to the philosophy of art and beauty. There's a lot that we can say objectively about art and beauty, right? So it's not all a matter of taste. But if time permitting, we'll see that at the end of the course. But for our part in this class, we are concerned about propositions and claims and knowing what constitutes a good argument as opposed to a bad argument, because not all arguments are created equal. A lot of students get tripped up on that. Freedom of speech is a completely different issue than what we're talking about, but it should be noted that even though you have the freedom to make whatever claims you want, and believe me, conspiracy theorists do this, doesn't mean that their arguments are good, right? And what I want you to be able to do at the end of this course, my goal is to get you to develop those critical thinking skills that you already have so that you can discern a good argument from a bad argument, right? And so on Wednesday, I will talk to you about the cognitive biases, and there are many cognitive biases, as you've seen if you've already read the chapter, and we'll talk about that later.